Dr. Yvette Erasmus is a psychologist, a teacher, and a consultant specializing in transformative learning. She is a sought-after relational intelligence expert, which is an amazing thing to say, with over 3 decades of real-world experience in human transformation, healing, growth, and learning. Yvette helps us, those of us who participate with her in whatever ways, to embrace and enjoy our differences while staying grounded in a fundamental unity. Her work is dedicated to bridging differences and to bringing whatever is divided and fragmented back into wholeness, integrity, and harmony, even over Zoom, right? So, Yvette, I am done talking until I begin to ask you questions. So it is a joy and welcome. And if we could clap, we would all be clapping together.
Oh,
Thank you. It's good to see you.
it's lovely to be here. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Can you hear me okay at this volume? Is everything sounding fine? Okay.
Sounds good.
Good. Well, good morning. It really is a delight to be here. I do prefer being in person, but I'm also very grateful for the convenience of being able to be with you from my house and in my study. And I'm going to go ahead and just share my slide deck with you. So let's see if this works for a moment. I think it will. Let's see. There we go. So I'm going to just try and share that. And then I think I'm going to hit play like this. Does that work for everybody? Just if someone can just give me a note in the chat that everything is working the way that it should, then okay, great. We can just go from here. Okay, so what we're going to talk about today, okay, so for those of you who don't know me, there's often a question about the accent. So let me just get that out of the way right away. I was born in South Africa. I lived there until I was 2. Then we moved to Malawi, which is in South Central Africa. I lived there until I was about 6. I went to elementary school in Germany. We lived in Munich. I lived in Germany until I was 10. I went back to South Africa when I was 10 during the heart of state of emergency, apartheid, racist, white South Africa. Went to middle school. Then I went to high school in LA. We were moved to LA. My father was a diplomat, so we were moved every 3 or 4 years. And I did high school mostly in LA. I went to the U of M here. I did a degree in psychology and English, worked for the YMCA, became a teacher, moved into international education, worked in international schools, lived and worked in Egypt, England, Arizona, Bali, Indonesia, and then I came back to Minnesota in 2007, and I've lived here ever since. So just to give you a little bit of a sense, the accent changes depending upon who I'm speaking to and what country I'm in, and this is what it sounds like here. Okay.
Yvette,
Yes.
I'm going to, we have a hand raised from Ann Seltz.
Oh, lovely. Yes. Hi, Anne.
So Ann, I'm going to allow you to talk.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
That was a mistake.
Oh, well, good. And well, that's a good indication for other people. If you raise your hand, I'm going to call on you. So
I was raising my hand in response to, yes, I can hear you just fine. So
the hand raising function is going to be my indication that you want to ask something.
I apologize.
No, it's all right. We're learning together, Ann.
All right.
Lovely. Okay, good. Yay. It's also just nice to hear your voice, Anne. So good to have you here. Okay, so that's just a little bit about me. And what I want to talk about today, the brief subject that we're going to dive into today is how inner mastery has outer impact. So there are many ways for us to affect social change. Some of them are from the outside in, and some of them are from the inside out, and some of them are individual, and some of them are cultural, and some of them are systemic. So there's a lot of different ways that we can have a look at any given problem. But the one that I'm really going to be focusing on today, and I just want to be clear so you know where to orient me on the roadmap, is I'm going to be talking about the internal changes that each one of us can do as individuals that then ripple out into the world. Now, in choosing that focus, I'm not suggesting that that is the only way or the most powerful way necessarily, but it is one that all of us have agency over and that we can do something about. And so that's really the way that I'm going to focus today's presentation, with the disclaimer that we always need to be embracing a both and. It is both from the inside out, and it is also from the outside in. And I'm not trying to minimize the importance of other ways of impacting an issue. I'm just choosing that focus from the inside out for the topic for today. So today we live in times where I personally am feeling a lot of concern and a lot of distress over the amount of scorn, lying, condemnation, judgment, hatred, division, just absolute disregard for decency and humanity that I see rising in the world. And so I want to begin with a quote by Dr. Martin Luther King, that returning hate for hate multiplies hate, adding deeper darkness to a night already devoid of stars. Darkness cannot drive out darkness, only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate, only love can do that. Sounds lovely. It's a beautiful, I love this quote. It is one of my favorites, but one of my questions through life has been, well, what does that actually mean on the ground? Because sometimes what people do is they take a quote like this and they end up in passivism, and they end up thinking, well, the only thing we can do is just empathize with people who are different from that. And while I think that's a great beginning, what I'm hoping to do today is give you more tools than just empathy. Empathy is very, very important, but I want to expand your tool set a little bit beyond that and invite you to think a little bit about how you are showing up in times like these that inadvertently are actually joining the very consciousness that we are trying to transform. And raise your awareness around that, encourage you, if your awareness is already raised, give you some validation, hopefully, for the good things you're already doing, and some practical ways to stay on the path of literally changing the game instead of trying to change the game by joining the game. You'll see what I mean in a moment. So we're going to explore today how to live in integrity into the values that we say we stand for. I'm going to give you some tools for actually changing the game itself, not just railing against it. And we're going to talk about getting to the root causes of violence instead of just managing the symptoms. And like I said, again, I'm taking an individualistic view today. We're not going to talk systemically. That's a whole different, that's a 5-day training minimum for an introduction, right? Okay. We're living in what Charles Eisenstein calls a story of separation. And if we look around us, we are surrounded by a series of wake-up calls and some invitations to some profoundly sacred questions. When we're living in times like the ones we are currently living in, 2020 has certainly knocked the socks off a lot of us. We're called to some pretty profound questions, such as, who are we in times like these? When we cannot control the outcome, who do we become? And when it feels like the world is crumbling around us, who do we want to be? Why do things happen? What is the purpose of life? What is human nature? What is sacred? Who are we as a humanity? And where have we come from and where are we going? Your answers to these questions, the way in which you personally address and answer these questions, will form the foundation of how you then interact with others in the world. So I'm not going to answer them for you, obviously. These are questions that you get to answer for yourself. But these are very different questions than the ones that come up for me reactively. My general question when I'm speaking with my friends are more things like, who are these people? Who are these people that we share the planet with? Not as helpful a question as these. And so I offer them to you as places, touchstones to ground back into as you are facing the things that are causing you distress in your lives. And I'm going to address them indirectly as we go. So the story of separation, as Charles Eisenstein calls it, is one in which we are all living in echo chambers. And here's what I mean by that. I don't know how many of you have watched the Netflix special, The Social Dilemma, all about social media, or if you've been reading and keeping up with the ways in which algorithms really can create very particular realities for us. And we can end up living in a bubble where we can pretty much be surrounded by the news channels that give us our own views back to ourselves. And, we read the people who have similar views, and we run a risk of sort of ending up thinking that the world is just like me and that everything is just like this. And then what happens is when we find out that somewhere else, the story is very different and almost disorientingly different, we don't have the capacity or the skills to sit with that tension very often, and we end up fragmenting. We end up creating enemy images of those people. It's happening both ways. And so I want to talk today about the importance of preparing yourself and self-resourcing for the kind of world that we are living in, and how we continue to be conscious, compassionate, courageous leaders in this world, and why we need to really ground in what it is that we want to see more of in the world. So the very first step is you deciding for yourself what it is that you want to stand for. And for myself, I know that it is about consciousness, about compassion, and about courage. And it is also about serving a world that works for all people. Now, a lot of people will say, yes, I want a world that is inclusive and that works for all people, except those people. Okay, except those bad people. And that's the piece that I really want to talk about today. How do we intellectually and practically position ourselves for that dilemma when we have people in the world who are doing tremendous harm? What do we do about those? So we're going to talk about preparation and self-resourcing, and I'm just going to give you a few nuggets. Of course, in half an hour, I can't, go super deep. And so here are the barriers when we're having conversations with people who are not like us, or whoever the other side is for you. The reason why we don't let one another in, okay, the reason why the world becomes increasingly fragmented and why we are becoming increasingly polarized, one of the reasons I should say why, is that we have a fragile sense of identity. People have a pretty fragile sense of identity, and so they want to protect their egos. They want to protect their sense of self. Not only that, but at least the way that politics is set up in the US at the moment is very tribal. You need to pick a team, and then you need to join that team, and then you need to be loyal to that team. And that consciousness in and of itself can be incredibly fortifying in some ways, but it can also be incredibly dangerous, because what happens is you become loyal to your team and you stop thinking critically, and you create an enemy out of the other. And the moment that that happens, the moment that we devolve into team dynamics, we lose our ability to solve the complex problems of our time, because the truth usually lies in the holding of a paradox. It usually lies in a more complex way of thinking. And the moment that we sort of devolve into nothing more than team loyalty, we end up creating a lot more fragmentation and separation, because you have to somehow choose a side. Also, we seek comfort. We don't want to be uncomfortable. So we're always going for whatever makes us comfortable, makes it easy, saves our energy. And this breeds a lot of misinformation out in the world, because we're only getting one narrow slice. And then the other thing that we do is we want our worldview protected. Most adults have gotten to a place where they have a particular worldview about how the world works and about what should happen. And they stop at a certain point being willing to examine that. What they want to do is fight for that. And both, again, are needed. We want to be able to fight for what we stand for and what we really believe in, but we need to simultaneously maintain the ability to constantly be reflecting on what it is that we believe and what it is that we think we know. And when we have this fragmentation happening, we run the risk of doing one without the other. And becomes incredibly problematic. So I want to talk a little bit about the current breakdown and tell you the story of Imaginal Cells. Most of you probably already know this. This comes from Barbara Marx Hubbard, who wrote a book called Conscious Evolution. And she tells the story of the biology of how a caterpillar turns into a butterfly. And so as caterpillars chew the leaves and get bigger and bigger and bigger and fatter and fatter and fatter, they have an immune system and sort of the structure of the caterpillar. And as they get bigger and bigger, they also have something that biologists are calling imaginal cells. And those are the cells that have the blueprint for the butterfly in the cell. And as the caterpillar grows, the imaginal cells begin to proliferate. And initially, the nervous system, the immune system of the caterpillar sees these cells as a threat because they carry the blueprint of a new structure that is not a caterpillar. And so the immune system begins attacking the imaginal cells because they are seen as a threat to the caterpillar. This is very much what's going on in the world today. Old structures are beginning to crumble, and there are many visionaries, imaginal cells, people with innovative, creative, new ideas about new structures. And the old guard is seeing it as a threat, and they are going to, attack the imaginal cells. So in some ways, you could think of that as a metaphor. Eventually, however, the imaginal cells proliferate and they send a cue, and the caterpillar goes into a cocooning state. So it begins making a cocoon. It creates for itself a container. And inside of that container, the imaginal cells overwhelm the immune system of the caterpillar and it turns into goo. There is no structure. So you need a container in order for things to melt on the inside and for the old structures to fall away. But if you've got a safe container for that to happen, then incredibly creative things can happen in the chaos, what we might call chaos, that is inside the cocoon. And the imaginal cells carry the blueprint of the butterfly. And with time, eventually, the butterfly emerges. And the caterpillar is no longer there, but it is all the same organism. And I find this an incredibly, incredibly hopeful story and a very useful metaphor for myself as I try to position myself a little bit in what is happening on our planet at this time. So we want to move from a story of separation, domination, and control to a story of interdependence, connection, and humanity. And one of the things that is going to require from us, or at least invite us to do, is the ability for each of us to settle into the spaces between the old stories. We need to begin settling into the space between old stories, into holding ambiguity, into entering a place of not knowing, into being able to psychologically enter into places of not having all of the answers and wanting to think together, be together, and sit with ambiguity and discomfort of unpredictability. One of the things Charles Eisenstein says is when we're able to do this, that is when we become in touch with the real. And there is a deep, deep longing, at least in America for sure right now, for some more contact with what is real and with what is true. Each disaster lays bare the reality underneath our stories, the terror of a child, the grief of a mother, the honesty of not knowing why. In such moments, dormant humanity awakens as we come to each other's aid, human to human, and we learn who we are. One of the things that I'm going to invite you to really get committed to, if you're not already, is seeing every human being as human and coming from a place as much as possible of shared humanity. The alternative is that we're going to create enemy images and end up in a civil war. So the more we act from separation, the more we create even more separation. The more we act from judgment and condemnation, the more we amplify judgment and condemnation in our world. And the more we act from empathy, growth, learning, and healing, the better able we are to create a world that reflects healing, growth, connection, and togetherness. So here's what I want to tell you. Most of us were raised in systems of domination, and most of us, our psychological default is psychological domination. We tend to have a colonial mentality, especially if you were raised white. Trust me, I know a lot about being raised in a colonial mentality. And what I mean by a colonial mentality is this idea that your way of seeing and doing and thinking and visioning is the right, more evolved, more developed, more healthy one, and that you are here to help those people evolve like you. And you may want to think a little bit about how that's working in the political arena right now. This idea that whatever you want to align with, but this idea and psychological experience of ourselves as somewhat superior to others is part of what is driving a lot of this fragmentation. And I'm going to invite people to just have a look at that and find out what is that doing inside of your own psyche, because the first place that we change it is in ourselves. If I have not done my own self-reflection, undone the colonialism that I inherited, undone the judgment and condemnation and one-upping and elitism or whatever it is that I defend myself with and keep myself psychologically comfortable with, it's going to be very, very difficult for me to actually help create systems that don't replicate that as I move forward in whatever I'm creating in my world. So the first task is to go inward and to drop in and understand what I've internalized. Because the systems out there that I was raised in, I've absorbed psychologically, and those systems now live in me. And the first place that I begin to undo a system of domination is by undoing it in my own psyche. And as I do that work, the way in which I show up in the world will be fundamentally different. And I will begin radiating out a different way of being. And that will be infinitely more powerful and inspirational to other self-healing systems, self-growing human beings, people who are wanting to evolve and learn and grow. It is that kind of inspiration that it is possible that is really needed in times like these, not condemnation, judgment, force, demand, and violence. Okay. So, as Audre Lorde would say, the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. Dominating others is not going to fix systems of domination. We do not want to keep switching sides. It's not about who's up this century, who has control this century. That entire game, the entire domination system game, needs to be transformed. If we had more time, I would talk about the difference between a domination hierarchy and a growth hierarchy. I'm not talking about getting rid of hierarchies. Growth hierarchies are incredibly useful and needed. We do not want the death of the expert, but I'm talking today about domination hierarchies or systems of inequity and injustice. Okay, when we come across difference, which we're coming across in huge amounts, Milton Bennett has talked about six different ways to deal with difference. We can deny the difference. We can defend the difference. We can minimize the difference. We can accept the difference. We can adapt to the difference, and we can integrate the difference. In different contexts, in different circumstances, in different timeframes, any one of these might be a useful psychological coping mechanism. But I'm going to suggest to you today that the big thing that we probably want to be aiming for is how to integrate differences in an inclusive culture. And it requires a bit of a holding of a paradox, because one of the things that is different is that not everybody wants integration. So I want to talk a little bit about domination systems and how they work. When we have an intention in a domination system, it is to exert control over ourselves, others, and the world. Our relationship with power is power over and under. We use blame and shame to control and coerce people. We think of the world through perpetrators and victims. We assign identity factors to perpetrators, victims, and then you could add the triangle of rescuers. The organizing question through which we see the world and through which we examine ourselves and others is the question, what is wrong and who is wrong? We're going to have, two answers to that question. Either what is wrong or who is wrong is you. There's either something wrong with you or with those people. And the moment we get into that consciousness, we are creating enemy images. We are othering. We are dehumanizing. We are feeling very self-righteous and superior. And that gives us license to tell other people what to do, to exert power over them, and to think that it's for their own good. If I think what is wrong is me, I will see an increase in anxiety. I'll start to feel really anxious and depressed. We see a lot of learned helplessness. People can begin identifying with victim identities, that the world just happens to them. There's nothing that they can do. They are always being acted upon and don't have the power to act. Which, by the way, is the case for a lot of people. I'm not saying that this doesn't happen. I'm just talking a little bit about the symptoms. And if we keep going down that continuum, we have what Carolyn Meese calls sort of a psychological organization around our woundology. We actually begin to develop an identity around our wounds, which keeps us collectively very, very stuck, because what we want is to help people heal, not organize around trauma and wounds. Because when we organize around them, the old adage, hurt people, continues. So we keep passing down the trauma and the hurt when we're not supporting ourselves and others and actually healing it. Our language and attention and domination system is me versus you. It's tribal. Domination systems are about one tribe being up and one tribe being down. We see a lot of evaluation and interpretation, and we think that our evaluations and interpretations are true. We confuse them with truth. We privilege thinking and cognition. We suppress and repress the feminine, which is feelings, and I'll talk about that in a moment. And this privileging of thinking and cognition is one of the legacies of the patriarchal systems that we've inherited. We still want thinking and cognition. We don't want to make that bad. You know, a domination system here would say, well, patriarchy is bad, so we need a matriarchy, or we need some other thing, and we're just going to do a flipping over of one up, one down, and we're just going to trade roles, which is not what I recommend at all. We get very attached to right and wrong strategies, who's right and who's wrong. And then our relationships become infused with demands. You have to do this. You should do this. You must do this. Good people do this. Healthy people do that. Bad people do that. We put people into categories and then we judge and condemn them. We make demands of them. And in doing this, we create incredible cycles of rebelling and submitting. And we cycle through power struggles. And the game continues. This is a game of separation, of domination, of violence, and it continues. And when you've internalized this, you're going to find yourself in tremendous inner conflict, constantly in power struggles with yourself, feeling like you're working against yourself. Like, you know, you should do this, but you don't do this because, you know, what you really want to do is this, but what you want really isn't good. Like people get stalled out in internal gridlock. And when they're in that place, they have very little energy left for actually making transformative changes in the world. And that's one of the things I'm hoping to change. What we really need to balance out is we need people to understand how to create collaborative, co-creative systems. And a collaborative, ecologically sound system, whether it is in yourself and then it ripples out into the world, and this happens inside of you first. Your intention primarily is to be connected with one another, to find your place in the ecosystem. You are not superior and better to everybody else, but you play an incredibly important role in an ecosystem. And you find out what that is, and then you play that role, knowing that if each one of us is doing the thing that we are meant to do, that there is a synergy and an inherent collective wisdom that will begin to gain and maintain momentum. In this, we have peaceful co-creative relationships with other humans, understanding that everybody has a role to play. We learn about power with, we develop the skills to have shared power with other people. This is difficult when we've been raised only in domination systems because we haven't had a lot of experiences of it. So we go and learn. We learn about co-creation. We learn about collaboration. We learn about interdependence. In a domination system, we think either I'm isolated and independent and you can't tell me what to do and it's my right and blah, 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 or I'm completely dependent. I don't know what to do and I need somebody to tell me all the time whether to do this or to do that. And what we need is mature adults who are able to be interdependent. The power we have is used to address issues, to address the very real issues that we have in our times, not to turn against one another, and to solve problems instead of continuing to pathologize people. Domination systems will have you pathologizing the people. It is a way of keeping your attention off of where you could actually make change. So figure out inside of yourself all of the ways in which you keep pathologizing people and take a step out. You do not want to keep doing that. You want to address the problems. The people are not the problem. What they've inherited, what each one of us has inherited and internalized and continue to live into, thereby perpetuating it. Yes, we want more consciousness. We want more compassion. We want more courage. We want more vision. But the people, at least as I see it, are inherently good, looking for a better way. And we've got to help each other figure out how to do that. The organizing question in a collaborative system is what is needed? What do we need? What is the next step? What will help us move forward together? We stop asking what is wrong and going backwards and pathologizing and blaming and shaming. We just stop putting energy into that. Just stop. No more attention, no more language, no more energy. We're going to get in the present moment and we're going to start asking what is needed. What will bring us together? How do we begin in this cocoon that Corona has sort of provided for us? In this cocoon, how do we begin operating out of a different blueprint? Our attention and our language is different. I think about you plus me plus us. I no longer think about me versus you. I'm thinking about what I like, what you like, however different you are, and what we as a collective humanity on the planet need. And I stay committed to that consciousness. This is now coming from the nonviolent communication model that Marshall Rosenberg brought in. He suggests 4 areas of attention. Getting very, very good at neutral observations and making clear descriptions. So what you're really talking about is what happened. In this moment, what is it that happened that I want to talk about? What is happening that I want to talk about? And you take your interpretations out. You get as clear as you can about the behaviors. You bring your emotions back online, yours and others. You create space for the anger, for the grief, for the despair, for the helplessness. You develop the ability to sit with the emotions because they connect you to intrinsic motivation and they need to be metabolized if we're going to stop re-traumatizing one another. We ask what is alive for us and we get grounded in our bodies. We stop pretending that we're not embodied beings and we bring our entire whole selves back instead of trying to solve everything from mind consciousness that tends to be a top-down consciousness. We also bring the body consciousness and intelligence, which is a bottom up, and we get these things to begin communicating in an infinity symbol and a feedback loop with one another where true wisdom can emerge. We also get a much deeper connection to what Marshall Rosenberg would call universal human needs, the intrinsic motivators that every human being, regardless of age, regardless of culture, gender, identity characteristics, the things that we all need: safety, security, predictability, meaning, purpose, affection, belonging, mattering, to be valued, to be seen, to be known. We start learning what those needs are, and we get very, very committed to grounding ourselves in the needs that humans need to get met as a new organizing principle. We replace colonial ideas of superiority and right and wrong with a deep commitment to creating a world in which we are more able to meet more people's needs. And in our relationships, we come from a place of shared power where we co-create solutions through invitations, through asks, through requests, through possibilities, and an ability. What we bring to that is an ability to hear yes or no, and we're honoring choice and freedom for all people as we move through it. All right, so I'm noticing that it is 10:06, and we could talk a little bit about how to work with some difficult conversation. Well, I'm just going to keep going. I'll just stop at 10 and we'll see how far we get. So if you're going to be on the ground in a relationship with somebody who has an opposing position, you're going to Thanksgiving dinner, and I don't know, we're talking about politics, we're talking about mosques, we're talking about social distancing, we're talking about what should happen in the world. If you're wanting to do that conversation differently, if you're wanting to come from a new consciousness, here are some ways that you might do that. Before you go in, prepare yourself to dive into what you see. What you see is the opposing position. And before you even enter into that conversation, figure out the deep needs and interests that they are fighting for. Okay, so figure out, is this about safety? Is this about choice? Is this about freedom? Is this about individuality? What is this about for the person? Find the places that you can join them before you ever even show up for that conversation. Understand that that individual, whoever it is in your family or out in the world, is identified with a team and has team loyalty. And so you begin by reflecting back the words that they use and by giving them the experience of being seen and heard and valued and accepted. That is what you bring. You bring an experience. Let them tell their story in the words they would use. Ask the questions. How did you come to that? And what else is important to you about that? And where does this play out in your life? And go slowly, because it's likely you're going to get triggered along the way. Remember, this is a mantra that I use all the time. Agreeing and understanding are two different things. My understanding your perspective does not mean that I agree with your perspective. But until I can meet your needs to be deeply understood and seen and received in your subjectivity, the only thing we're going to get in our relationship is resistance and defensiveness and debate and fragmentation. And until I have figured out a way that I can hold those perspectives in me, this is the inner mastery piece, until I can actually hold it in me without becoming reactive and triggered and wanting to jump out of the hot water, I will be unable to bring a different consciousness to the conversations that are needing it. And so this is emotional strength training that I am inviting us into, where we learn how to understand, take it in, and find these places inside of ourselves so that we can soothe ourselves and sit with it for longer. Because it is only the things that we are able to sit with and integrate and understand and become present to, those are the conditions needed in order for people to lower their defenses and join you in a space of thinking in a new way and thinking in a different way. But what is needed is trust. And the more that we keep coming at one another with judgment and condemnation and righteousness and yes, buts, we continue to feed the fragmentation and the polarization. Both sides currently feel like they're the oppressed minority. Both sides believe that they're fighting for goodness. Go out of ideology and into storytelling. Get it as personal as possible. Make it as personal about your own life and experiences and this person's life and experiences. Stay out of the ideology. And then be willing to change and shift yourself. That's how we lead the way. Okay, I'm going to stop there for a moment and find out. I can keep going. Do you have questions? Are there things people want to ask? How are we doing?
If you have questions, again, please type them into the Q and the A section at the bottom of your screen, or you can raise your hand and I can unmute you and you can speak, much like Anne showed us at the beginning how to do that. And in the meantime, while people are typing or raising their hands, there's a few things that stuck. I mean, this is wonderful, wonderful. One of the things you talked about, the spaces between the stories at the beginning, and that struck me because we often, at least at Plymouth, talk about God residing within the spaces between. That God is not over there, God is not up there, God is within and around, but specifically in the places between us. And that is where God can often be found. So I was struck by that. And also by when you said the word sit a lot, like sit with emotions, sit with your anger, sit with, and we, again, at Plymouth we are working on expanding our contemplative practices, which often is sitting.
Yes.
It is meditation and contemplation. And I'm just wondering, as we're waiting for people to ask questions, if you can speak to the role of contemplation, prayer, or meditation in that literal, well, you talk metaphorically sitting, in the literal sitting.
Yeah, absolutely. So, actually, let me just see. I'm just going to go through, hold on.
And then we do have a question coming in.
Yep. Okay. So this is like, okay. So what I'm advocating for today is that we take a personal inventory of where each of us personally can bring more consciousness and compassion to any given conversation. Partly because what I hear so many people railing against is that there is no truth, compassion, conversation, whatever in the spaces. And then what happens is we want to change the other person. Our first impulse is, how do we change them? And all I'm saying today is you will bring more consciousness and compassion into that conversation when you're embodying it. And in order to embody it, it also means not jumping out of yourself and looking out there as quickly, not that that's not needed eventually, but that it really does begin with going inward, bringing your attention inward and finding out what is getting hooked for me. What are the deep values that I'm wanting to stand for? What are the feelings that I'm unwilling or unable to tolerate? I mean, to the degree that I can't sit with ambiguity or discomfort, I'm not going to be able to be present to another person in their pain or in their, deep conviction about something. And if I'm unable to be present, we're not going to have a transformative conversation. We're going to recreate the old conversation.
Right.
So that ability to really be with myself, feel my feelings, know my wounds, heal my own trauma, gives me the capacity to stay for longer in the consciousness that I'm wanting to see more of in the world. And I think it is absolutely about drawing on transcendence, on capacity beyond our fragile ego selves.
Lovely. Thank you. So there's been a few questions about this presentation living on beyond this live moment? Yes, it will. When you go to Plymouth's website, which I will demonstrate at the end, all of our past forums are archived there, and this one will be as well. So once we get permission from the presenter, we do archive, and you can get that there. So Tom asks, can this be a one-sided method, or do both sides need to be willing to go down this path?
Well, it's so much more enjoyable when both sides are willing to go down the path, but that very rarely happens. So what I'm saying here is that it is absolutely, let's unpack this idea of one-sided. Okay, so yes, to answer your question very, very briefly, I would say I discover that it's one-sided a lot of the time, depending upon who I'm interacting with. I am working very much on bringing a different consciousness to conversations where the other people are still doing the old thing. Now, if I were to say that out loud, I would be perceived as arrogant, condescending, and controlling, because basically I'm saying, look at this great thing that I'm doing that I wish all of you were doing. So I don't do that. That's not where we're coming from. My work is being able to sit, and this is just, like, take it on if you want it. If it's not for you, don't take it on. But for me, it's about learning to sit with and be with human beings, understanding that they are afraid, that they are a product of their experiences in a large way, that they are grappling with their own questions of what is meaningful, how do I stay safe, how do I belong, what is the world that I want to create, and we're not having high quality conversations culturally about that. So where do people go? They go to their first thought, and then they begin to get entrenched in defending it. And what I'm really wanting to invite us to think about doing is bringing a capacity to take those conversations to the next step and the next step and the next step in a way that we are perceived as trustworthy and kind and interested, and not only perceived as, but that we're literally being those things. Because when we can come at one another from a place of love and a place of curiosity and a place of interest, I have seen over and over again that insights emerge, that people begin asking the questions themselves, that these things begin to emerge from within the human. And we forget that. We forget that if we just create this cocoon, this container, and we make it safe, it's easier for us to become a little bit more gooey. But if we feel like we're constantly under attack and needing to defend ourselves, there's no room for transformation. And what we're really going after is relational containers that make transformation possible without needing to micromanage it. You just need to micromanage yourself. That's the only person you need to micromanage. And in that sense, it is one-sided. But what you bring into that relational frame radiates and fundamentally changes the experience of the other person. And it doesn't have to be conscious, and it doesn't have to be explicit. And it does often need to be repeated experiences over time, because in the early stages, people don't trust it. Even if you show up different for the first 5 conversations, they'll still project onto you that you're doing the old thing. So just keep that in mind. It does take some tenacity and some commitment to purpose. The question, what do you want? Yes, it absolutely. I would ask a lot of questions. What do you want? What is it that you're needing? What I will say is that when it's that open-ended with some people, it depends who you're talking to, they don't really know what they want. They just want the other things to go away. They want an easier, simpler, safer. They want the world to be like them. So then I would try and extend that a little bit further. It sounds like if you were to get blah, 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 you'd have more ease, you'd have more freedom, you'd have more choices. Is that what you're really valuing? You're really valuing more freedom and choices. If you can find a value that they're valuing that you agree with, you can say, no, I do too. Can we think together about how this particular strategy, whatever it is, this law, this policy, whatever it is, actually creates freedom and choice for all of us? Because I think we agree on what we're wanting. I just think we're disagreeing on how to get there. Would you mind thinking with me? I'd really enjoy it if I could think through. So the more you make it about your change and about your willingness to shift and about your learning, you are modeling a new way of being. And it's just like if you're doing ballroom dance and both of you are waltzing, as long as you continue waltzing while complaining about it, that's basically what people are doing. They're doing the same steps. They're all waltzing together, but one of them is like, I hate this dance. I wish we weren't doing this dance. I wish you were doing it different. And what I'm saying is stop saying that. Begin doing the foxtrot. Let them keep waltzing. And one of two things is going to happen. They're either going to start trying to attune to you and do what you're doing, or you're going to find a lot of other people who are foxtrotting, and you're going to start a whole new movement. And eventually people are going to come on board. But trying to change other people all the time is just a waste of our energy, at least in those critical and judgmental ways.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So
one more thing. I just had one mantra that I wanted to leave you with. Can we just, I know it's 10:20. See, here are all my other slides. You're just going to have me back. Here we go. Wait, that's not what I wanted it to do. I wanted it to go right here. This is just what I wanted to have you leave with as a way of reorienting. May I keep my heart open? May I remain curious no matter how difficult things may get? May I generate a warm heart toward myself and others? May I see what I do without turning against myself or others? So that really captures the essence of my own vision today of how to inspire you to becoming more like a butterfly and less like a caterpillar. Thank you, Seth.
thank you. Thank you, Yvette. And I will clap for all of us. I'm sure all clapping where we are. We appreciate your wisdom, your thoughtfulness, and your expertise. This is wonderful. And for those of us listening, Yvette often teaches programs and classes and retreats and workshops with Plymouth. So keep an eye out for those. If this is something, if you like the way that she is approaching these, remember that. And so the next time a class is available, please sign up for it. So in closing, Yvette, if you could stop sharing your screen, I'm going to share mine very briefly.
Yes. Let me see if I can figure out how to do that. Yes, I can. There you go.
So I am going to share my screen because I want to, there's some questions about what to do, how to see this or share this later. So our website is in the process of changing. It's like building an airplane in the air. So there are changes happening without the whole thing necessarily looking different. But Sunday Forum has a page. If you go up to the top here and go to Explore, and then click on Sunday Forum, all of our forums are here. And maybe some of you got to this today this way. So you'll see whatever the next forum is at the top, and then a box here that says join the forum here. And that's a way you can join the forum besides off the Friday email. Next week is right here. And it's Art for All. And it is going to be many people speaking to us about this project. And it is going to be really exciting. And the way that art can be used as expression for all people, no matter what level of ability that we say that the person may or may not have. And so please join us again next week at 9:30 for this. But if you go all the way to the bottom, you'll see the forum archive. And you can watch each of the previous forums that we have had once the person gives us permission to do so. So we have not quite gotten permission from last week's presenter. She just hasn't responded to do so, but we anticipate she will say yes. And Yvette has already said yes. So this will be here within the next several days. So that is your quick website tutorial and finding things. I appreciate you all. It is an honor to be in this conversation with you all, and please be safe today. Worship is happening if you choose to watch it live on Facebook in about 8 minutes. Otherwise, it'll be on our website for you to watch at your convenience, at your time. Again, thank you, Yvette. We appreciate you. You're a great friend and a great gift. Thank you.
Have a lovely week. Thank you for having me.
Take care, everyone.